So welcome everyone to tonight's session. We are so happy to have you here and share space with us and learn alongside us at this session. Tonight is the next session for the LLINK initiative, and LLINK is the Literacies and Libraries Investigating New Knowledges initiative that I'm Amber Moore in the Department of Language and Literacy Education, and Dr. Melanie Wong, who is my colleague in that department, have started as a way to provide some extra learning for the programs that we both coordinate. And so we're going to start with a land acknowledgement, and I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Melanie Wong for that.
So I am privileged and honored to do this land acknowledgement, and I want to say welcome to everyone before I do it. But I want to acknowledge that I'm an uninvited guest on the unceded and traditional territories of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam peoples. And I want to also invite those of you in our Zoom room, if you would like to acknowledge the lands that you're currently situated in, on the chat, that would be wonderful. But many of you know that with my recent work in place-based literacies, I've been really reflecting significantly on the 4 Rs in an effort to engage in decolonization, but also to reflect on steps towards reconciliation. Today, I want to focus on the notion of respect. And that's something I've been really reflecting on personally. So on the University of British Columbia campus, you might have noted these signs in various different locations on campus. And these signs are reminders, but also opportunities to engage in critical reflection. So lately, I've been really walking past these particular signs and looking more particularly at this particular sign. And there's several key parts in this image that I want to note with you. First, I focus on the backward text, which is British Columbia, which is symbolic and also critical to reflect on. British Columbia being a very colonial name, and also the fact that there needs to be a shift in institutional structures, which are often backwards and colonial. Second, how our host at UBC campus, which is the Musqueam people, the host indicating to me that we are guests and we are very much uninvited. So therefore, returning back to that reflection of the 4 Rs and this notion of respect, I think we really need to be respectful for our Indigenous hosts, which includes listening and recognizing that what one does affects everyone and others and things around us. So I am really delighted, just as Dr. Amber Moore, my colleague, has indicated, and welcomed you. We want to say welcome again. It's really good to see students from both the online MEd and literacy education program, but also the teacher librarianship program join us for this LLINK. It's our second event, Literacy and Libraries Investigating New Knowledges, and we are very lucky today to have the honor to have Dr. Leah Kelley, which we will introduce shortly. However, I do want to actually just mention how this particular LLINK event came about. So LLINK, as I mentioned already, stands for Literacies and Libraries Investigating New Knowledges. And we created this initiative really to produce a dedicated space to connect literacy research to practice in K-12 classrooms and school libraries, with the aim to really promote whole school approaches to literacy learning. It's emerged from a shared commitment to provide additional learning opportunities for students in both of our programs. And this one is one that I'm very proud of, which is the online MEd and literacy education program. And there's several students here in our midst as well. But if you are interested to hear a little bit more about this program, our deadline for our next application is March 15th, 2025. And you can scan the QR code and learn a little bit more about our program. And I'm going to invite Amber to talk a little bit about her program.
Thank you so much, Melanie. So I just wanted to very quickly say that I am so fortunate to be the coordinator of the teacher librarianship program here at UBC, which is housed in our home department, LLED. We have, as some of you may know, some of you are probably students in our program, but we have 2 options for how you can go about your learning in this program. We do have a certificate program as well as a diploma program. And so there's a couple different ways in which you can become a school librarian with us. And if you're interested in learning more, I just offer the QR code here on the screen. It'll take you to our LLED website where you can find some more information. And just very quickly, I wanted to note that our next application deadline is at the end of the month, November 30th, although we do welcome applications on a rolling basis. So if you are interested, feel so welcome to please reach out to me or access our websites and learn more about our wonderful programs. Thank you. All right, so today I have the pleasure of formally introducing you to Dr. Leah Kelley. Today's event is featuring this wonderful colleague and friend of mine, and she is the author of the fabulous book, The Person Who Arrives, Connecting Disability Studies and Educational Practice for Teachers, Parents, and Others. And so tonight, our hope is that this talk is really for educators who are interested in exploring other ways of conceptualizing and understanding disability, thinking about the importance of centering lived experience and the role of storytelling in guiding practice in our classrooms, libraries, and communities. And so before we let Leah take over, I'd like to just say a few words about her and her background. So Leah holds a doctorate in education from Simon Fraser University. That's actually where her and I met and started collaborating. And at SFU, this is where her extensive career in public school education spans almost 3 decades, though. And she has held roles including being a primary teacher, inclusion resource teacher for K to 12, and SEL or social emotional learning helping teacher. She really brings a wealth of experience to her current position guiding pre-service teachers at the university level, including as an adjunct professor in the Faculty of Education here at UBC. Dr. Kelley's work focuses on connecting disability studies in education, or DSE, to educational practice, strength-based perspectives for supporting neurodiversity, addressing ableism, inclusive practices and pedagogy, as well as cultivating advocacy. Melanie, if you wouldn't mind just going to the next slide for me. I just wanted to offer folks here a QR code that would take you to a link where you can find Leah's wonderful book that I mentioned. As well, when Leah gets started on her talk, I'm also going to put a link to her beautiful website in the chat. But for now, I think I'll stop there just to ensure that Dr. Kelley has ample time to teach us. And so, Leah, if I could hand it over to you, I'm so excited to learn alongside you tonight.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Moore and Dr. Wong, for inviting me to be here with you as part of your wonderful LLINK initiative and for such a beautiful introduction. So welcome, everyone. I'm Leah Kelley, and I'm absolutely over the moon to be here with you as someone who believes in the power of story to connect and unite communities. So I live and learn on the unceded, stolen, and traditional lands of the Stalo people, in particular the Palalt and Chilkoyuk. I'm grateful for my First Nations friends who continue to educate uninvited settlers, such as myself, to be better stewards of the land and who guide us in our Heath, Lakalical, long-time journey to implement the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action in a way that privileges all First Peoples. I identify as multiply neurodivergent and otherwise disabled. I'm parent to an adult son who also identifies as disabled. I've been a public school teacher for, well, a long time. And now I'm working with families, community organizations, school districts, pre-service teachers at the university level, among other things. And I am a storyteller. For as long as I can remember, I've been captivated by the magic of storytelling, whether losing myself in the pages of a novel or reading aloud to a classroom of young students with that amazing feeling in the room when they are completely captivated, or trading stories at the kitchen table or a coffee shop with friends. There's something profound about the way stories have the ability to transcend boundaries and bring people together. And the way stories can take sometimes really complex ideas and just lay them out there so that they are accessible and understandable. And that's exactly what I hope to do with my own writing, to create narratives that resonate deeply with readers, educators, parents, and others. To spark conversations and to foster a sense of belonging within our community. And two, to support a shift in the way we think and talk about disability. This past spring, I attended a talk by Len Pierre about decolonization and reconciliation and racism. and looking more deeply at these. And he spoke of cultural safety aligned with Coast Salish practices and how we might take that practice forward with us by beginning with saying, what is your intent? So I will begin by being transparent with my intention and how I hope you will feel welcomed in this space. There might be ideas you encounter today that feel a little bit different and are not as familiar. I invite you to sit with these ideas. And if there are things that are new to you, hold them gently as another angle, as possibility, a layering in and an offering of a new lens, a critical lens, and also an opportunity to consider the importance of the language we use. I invite you to consider how the language we use shapes our ideas and how our ideas and our thinking shapes our assumptions, and how that affects the way we treat people and affects the way we operate, and it affects our systems and our ways of doing things. I want to talk about disability in a way that brings disability into the room very, very openly and consider opportunities to disrupt ideas around disabilities that are seen as shameful, including the language we use or avoid using when we're talking about disability. Because if you can't talk about disability, you can't talk about my reality. The stories I share in my book capture some of the foundational ideas in this whole area called disability studies, and in particular, disability studies in education, or DSE, which is an entire field of study that emerged in the 1980s and 90s and draws upon the experiences and perspectives of disabled people as the foundation for all disabilities research. So when you're looking at like the scope of traditions of other fields like psychology or philosophy, disability studies is relatively new. And it wasn't until I was in my doctoral program that I really came to understand and learn about this entire field of disability studies in education. That was a gap. DSE provides a way to critically view disability as a social construction where the primary problems disabled people face are understood as the result of social convention and not deficit. Disability studies explores the history of disability and the disability rights movement, and foregrounds counter narratives of disability and stories of resistance. And as such, it's central to my work. So my intent in being here with you is very much to share stories that hold these ideas and are examples that I hope shift things in some ways, and that you feel invited in. Stories and ideas that will hopefully spark your interest and spark opportunities for conversations that ripple out beyond our time together. So I thank you for being here. I'm thrilled to be talking with you. And now I'm going to do some reading. So tuck in, it's story time. This story is called Two Little Girls. Today I am at a district student services training for special education teachers and others, which is hosted in the multi-purpose room of one of our elementary schools. There have been marvelous conversations and dialogues around supporting diverse learners, building capacity in regular education classrooms, the importance of differentiated instruction and universal design, all within a framework of collective responsibility. I like that, collective responsibility. And then, during my lunch break, I was privileged to catch an incredibly profound glimpse into the wonderful culture of this inner city elementary school, collective responsibility. In the hallway, I overheard two little girls who were heading out the big double doors for their lunchtime play. I could only see the backs of their heads, but I caught a lovely bit of their conversation. My guess is they were in about grade 2 or 3, and they were speculating. I think it was the crowd that bothered him. He doesn't like crowds. No, responded the other child. I think it was the noise. He doesn't like a lot of noise. And with that, they were gone. I was only privileged to hear a tiny snippet of their interchange before they were out the door for their noontime adventures. Collective responsibility. Those little girls get it. Collective responsibility. And they got it from someone. They got it from their school. Collective responsibility. They got it from opportunities to discuss and to imagine the experience of another. Collective responsibility. They got it from opportunities to hear the language, to frame those experiences effectively so that they understood, so that they extended understanding to another and had the language to discuss it and speculate and get it. I conceptualize my book as a pedagogical space to introduce alternative ways to encounter an autistic, neurodivergent, or otherwise disabled child. It's an invitation to listen, to create space for children to be their authentic selves, to understand multiple ways of communication, and to be able to attend differently. I'm curious about the possibilities that might emerge when we shift attitudes about disability and inclusion away from the medicalized or pathologized model of disability. And I believe educators and students should have the opportunity to encounter other models of disability beyond the medical model, such as the social model and the identity and pride model and the human rights model of disability, to support our students in learning the skills of advocacy and developing pride in their identity. This next story is about activism and advocacy. It's called The Teacher's Kid. It's Not What You Think. I had the opportunity this evening to have a discussion with a colleague, a teacher who's also the parent of a 5-year-old autistic son. As we talked, this teacher commented, "It's great that you're a teacher. I'll bet you've been able to be a great advocate for your son within the school system. Our kids are fortunate." And I suppose this is true in many respects. My understanding of the system has supported us in navigating in varying degrees, and I recognize this as an advantage. But that's not how I responded. I might have caught him off guard when I said, no, my son has benefited much more from me being a social justice activist. It is activism that has made the difference. Our autistic, neurodivergent, and otherwise disabled children need us to show them how to be activists so that they can advocate for themselves. I hadn't really considered it before, but as I listened to my own words, I knew they held truth for me. As educators and parents, we want to ensure our children with disabilities know, understand, and feel pride in who they are. When they know themselves deeply and with respect, it is then that they can reject the message that they must conform to be okay, accepted, valued, or to belong. H, that's my son, turned 19 today, and I look forward with excitement and pride at this fabulous autistic and otherwise neurodivergent young man who now towers above me. I cannot help but look back and see that raising my son to feel comfortable with who he is and to understand that he can push back against injustice and discrimination and ableism is one of the most powerful things I have offered as a parent. As H's childhood recedes, I'm a little surprised that I feel no sadness or melancholy as I think back upon this journey. How can I feel melancholy when I observe this spectacular human sense of self that makes him comfortable in advocating for what he might need or not need or need in a different way. Along with his confidence, he's developed a sensitivity to extend his understanding beyond himself. He understands that he experiences both privilege and oppression, and how his experience of being disabled intersects with the lives and stories of other people who face discrimination or exclusion or injustice. I see him pushing back against oppression, even when it is not about him. It's beautiful. As educators, we have the opportunity to be cultivating pride and advocacy. We can ask, how can we, as teachers and parents and community members, work with our students who are disabled and all students and people with disability in our communities to see disability as an identity of pride and to learn about and understand the history of the disability rights movement and work with students and others in solidarity within our practice to learn about and understand that there are other ways to understand and respond to disability. I'm curious about the possibilities that might emerge when we shift attitudes about disability and inclusion away from the medicalized or pathologized model of disability. And I believe educators and students should have the opportunity to encounter other models of disability, to support our students in learning skills of advocacy and developing pride in their identity. Here's another story. It's called Ableism on a Sticky Note. I was visiting a grade 7 classroom in December 2019, where the teacher was supporting their students and facilitating a class meeting. I was a fly on the wall, watching and listening as a teacher gently corralled their class into a circle with the intent to discuss gossip and assumptions and treating others with respect. But that's not how it played out as the discussion evolved, which I sensed took the teacher by surprise. The class had an agenda of their own, and it involved talking about disability and judgment and different ways of being, including discussing an autistic student who was also a member of the class and part of the circle. The class spoke with such sensitivity and care, and there was this moment when a student brought the point home that what they were discussing was discrimination in the way that racism is discrimination. The student stopped what they were saying, and I could see the connection for them becoming more specific as they looked around the room at their classmates. They paused, and what they said next made my heart soar. We need a word like racism, except for when people have a disability. We need a word for the way the students with disabilities are not treated with respect or accepted for who they are. I could barely keep my seat, and I dug deep to keep my eyes from tearing up. I was moved and so impressed by these young people and the sophistication of their conversation, and even more so by the students' query and search for language to capture their thinking. It was not my role to step into the discussion, but after class, I slipped that teacher a Post-it note with information and a brief definition, and I explained, your students need this word. The word and idea they're searching for is ableism. The teacher lit up, declaring that they would share it with their students the next class. And here's another thing, something I think bears mentioning because it also pushes back against assumptions. This was not only a class of grade 7 students, it was their math science class that I had the privilege of visiting. The following week, I had the opportunity to connect with the same teacher, and they shared with me how excited their students were to be offered the word ableism. Language is important. It shapes our ideas. Language is intrinsically knitted together with our process of understanding. Sometimes the understanding comes before the word, and sometimes the existence of language creates space for understanding to emerge. So much is possible when teachers have information about disability and disability rights and the opportunity to understand the word ableism. Over time, I've learned about supporting the development of neurodivergent and other disabled children as they transition toward adulthood. My experiences have taught me about being sensitive and knowing when to step back and trust in time, in development, and in growth. It's also about how we are changed anew with each encounter, and that there are necessarily relational shifts as children and all people grow and develop. I'm going to share another story about letting go and trust and how things evolve and change over time. It's called The Key. This past week, as we were driving to an autism acceptance event, Harrison held up a key. "Look what I have, Mom." "You have a key." "It's a key to the shop." Pause as our eyes catch each other, ensuring that I get that this is big. His eyes grow wide and at the same time crinkle with the action of his broad smile. He gives me a beat to ensure I make the connection and then clarifies, "Yep, Gord gave me a key to his shop." "Nice," I respond in that appreciative way of extending a single syllable word into two. And I said something like, "Gord knows you are reliable, Harrison. You demonstrate that you are our trustworthy person." And we talked more about how that felt for him. This key, it's more than the key itself. It's a signifier, a symbol of faith, of trust, of presuming competence. And other people see it too. The awesome capability and capacity of this young man. He's loved, he's trusted, adored beyond the boundaries of me as his mom, beyond the boundaries of our house. The key is a symbol that Harrison is making his way, finding community and building relationships, a symbol of reciprocity. Step back a little more, Leah. He's got this. I beam with pride and gratitude, and he does the same. I make space for the beautiful natality of this moment. Step back a little more and give space for others to connect to this young man. Step back and make space for this moment of arrival, for this spectacular human. Continue to do so. And I think we have time for one final story. It's called Turn Their Head a Little Bit. Just got fun. After Harrison completed grade 12 in June of 2018, he was accepted into a one-year workplace employment program at the University of the Fraser Valley for students with disability. In July 2018, prior to the start of the fall term, it seemed timely to discuss how some of the other students might not have the same background in understanding disability as identity and disability pride as he does. Harrison had been enrolled in a distance education school for the past 9 years and had seldom encountered people who were not immersed in disability culture and pride, having been quite deliberately surrounded by activists, mentors, and friends in disability communities. I wanted him to consider that the other students may have only ever been told that individuals, such as himself, were special and had never even heard of ableism. I suggested, so people might have been hearing their whole lives from their parents and from their schooling that disability is a word you shouldn't use, and that they have special needs and that they're special. Harrison added, yeah, well, they're probably not hearing that from people with disabilities. So there was a comfortable but lengthy pause. And then he went on to explain his notion of gently offering another perspective. So I was thinking about the task program. Try to turn their head a little bit. Like it's kind of like Xbox or PlayStation. One has more benefits or slightly better benefits. Some people like one more than the other, like that sort of thing. But with disability, I checked my understanding. So to just kind of clunk them on the head with ideas about ableism and other things might be harsh, but your notion of turning their head a little bit, showing them another way, yes, he confirmed, like considering Xbox or PlayStation. Oh, I tried to keep pace. It's a metaphor. And in doing that, you're not suggesting what you've been doing is bad, even though you and I might think there are negative things about it. Yeah, just think about a different view. He cut me off, or perhaps graciously supported my ongoing struggle to process all things gaming and just turn their head a little bit. That's beautiful, I added, quite completely blown away. Harrison confirmed, yeah. And we were both quiet for a long time after that. There was nothing more to say. As I'm making my way, I realize the wisdom and importance of my son's message. I think back to our conversation, and I appreciate the way he conveys a certainty of faith and an inherent understanding that people might move at a pace that is different from his own. Harrison holds space for others in a beautiful way that reminds me of my father. And I will carry his honor with me in my next steps as I continue to collaborate with others to bring about change. We just have to turn their head a little bit. It's my hope that my work and my book, The Person Who Arrives, might offer a way in for teachers and parents and others to envision disability from another angle or perspective, an opening to explore their own relationship or relationships with disability, with their students, their children, their colleagues, and others, and possibly within themselves. It's an invitation to consider the ideas and concepts of disability studies and the importance of including perspectives and lived experience of disabled people in guiding our practice as educators and as parents. I want to encourage all of us to explore our biases by attending to the influence of ableism, the importance of the language we use, the models and the constructs we draw upon, and the ways these shape our approach, understanding, and response to disability. I have great hope about what's possible when we can have a child come into our classrooms, our libraries, into our lives, and we can say, welcome as you are. And I don't see you as broken or less than. I see you as perfectly being who you can be today. And then we support development from there. As teachers, we can consider as well what we offer, not only with our attitudes and assumptions and curiosity, but also with the resources we offer. I'm a storyteller, but like you, I'm also a curator of stories. And as such, we are positioned to be considering whose stories are told and whose stories are included. It's important, and it's also inherently political. Considering what books are on the shelf is political. Considering the stories we read to children, the stories we choose to share, whose stories we choose to share, to believe. What are the stories we focus upon and draw upon? And how can these stories build inclusion, whether it's disability, race, gender, or the kind of family you have, or who's in your family? And who do we let tell us which stories we read, which stories our children and students have access to? I think now, more than ever, it's vital, critical, essential that we consider these things. What are the stories we share with our students? what are the stories we draw upon to inform our pedagogy? So, oh my goodness, thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you today, and I hope together we can work to consider how we can work to turn people's head a little bit.
So I want to say thank you, Dr. Kelley, Leah, for such a beautiful thoughts. There's so many things that I'm thinking right now, but at the same time, I'm just so grateful for the wisdom that you shared with us, the stories, and just this time and space that we have right now. I do want to invite our audience that if you have questions, please take a moment. You could type them in the chat. We are a small group, so maybe a hands up feature would help us to navigate question time. But if you do have a specific question for Dr. Kelley, then please, we invite you to type it into the chat or at least give us a hands up so that we know, and you're welcome to unmute and ask your question.
I'll drink water.
I think we're all doing the teacher thing where we're like, okay, we're going to give folks a moment to sort of let everything settle in and marinate.
There's lots of comments for you.
Sorry, I muted myself. Actually, I'm reading them. Thank you, everyone. It's beautiful.
Amber, I wonder if maybe you wanted to share a question first and then we get our.
Yeah, I was just making sure I gave enough space for any folks who wanted to go before me because I like I sort of prefaced in my introduction of Dr. Kelley's work, I've known Leah for a few years now, and I've had the pleasure of working with you before. So I always have rich questions about, well, I don't know about rich questions, but I have questions about your rich work. And so I did come prepared with some invitations for you to consider responding to. And some of them are especially in response to the beautiful excerpt that you shared with our group. For those of us who RSVP'd, I just want to say thank you so much for sharing a slice of this beautiful art that you've shared a little bit tonight in some of the readings you've done. Okay, so I have, like I said, I have several questions. I'd love to focus my first question around writing, if that's okay. I know that there's a few folks here in attendance tonight who are currently, I know this because I'm running the course, but who are currently in a course that's focused on writing pedagogy, practice, and scholarship. And so I feel as though I would be quite remiss if I didn't take the opportunity to ask you a little bit about your writing practice. You know, maybe how you understand your own writer's voice, your process, and so forth, because something that really strikes me always in your writing, and especially a quality of this book in particular, is it feels very deeply intertextual to me, which I find so exciting. I find fragments and intertextual layered work to be really inspiring. And I found your text to be almost, it felt scrapbooky in moments. And I mean that in the best possible way, where I see you braiding threads of understanding and illumination together. And so as you know, I also like to write in this way and even design courses in this way, as some of the folks in this chat know. And so this is just to say, I wondered if you wanted to take an opportunity to talk a little bit about what characterizes your writing practice or your writing process for this book or just in general with your scholarship.
Yeah, I'm absolutely. I love talking about writing. So cut me off when we've answered it. Yeah, I began writing when I was too young to write, and writing was mechanically difficult for me. And so I would just say, Mom, Dad, I got a poem. And they would drop everything and grab a pen and paper and write it down for me. So my first writing is in my parents' hand. But I've always been a writer, like, so from that like pinched too tight, weird grip I had, and I still have actually, that, I just couldn't do it. And so, and then I've always been a writer and a journaler. And then the importance of that and how it allows you to look back at things is really important for me, and to reflect back, to know where I've been. That practice of writing, and I know just even in my teacher training, it was always like, oh, write reflections and stuff. But it was like, that was easy for me because I was already doing that. But also in like my master's program and doctoral program, it became really important that I could look back and see where I'd been and how things had shifted. So I can clock in terms of, seeing how I've changed, and then I go, well, why did I change my thinking around that? Because I can look back on what my thinking was. So that part is key, really important. Speaking to the intertextual space, I think I really became a teacher because I couldn't decide what I wanted to do in life. I wanted to be a puppeteer, and I wanted to be an artist, and I wanted to be a writer, and I wanted to be an actress, and I wanted to be an archaeologist and a marine biologist. So being a teacher, especially a primary teacher, I really felt like I could do it all. And then also, so I love to draw, I love to write poems, and I really wanted, you picked up on it so beautifully, Amber, just the way your description was about the weaving. And I really didn't want to signal, now there shall be a poem, and now I will put a doodle, and now I'm telling you this story. And I really wanted the stories to speak for themselves as well. And same with the other things that are in there. And then I also was very deliberate in leaving space around things, so that it wasn't this wall of text, which I look at the big wall of text and I just like, I don't even want to encounter it. I also was a blogger for a long time. And I know that small bits of text draw the eye forward and through. And it also increases accessibility. It's also very deliberate in my writing to have it accessible, not just in the way it was spaced out and approached, not with giant walls of text, but very, very deliberate in writing in language that wasn't full of the language I only ever heard when I started a doctoral program. I think the word epistemology is in my book once, and that's because it's in a quote, right? But it's not something I actually said. Or yeah, so those kinds of things. Yeah, so the space, the braiding, the writing as practice. And I really wanted people to be able to encounter sometimes difficult things to read about with stories and language that was beautiful. But that was my hope.
Oh, thank you so much. That's such a rich answer. Oh my goodness. I'm so excited we're recording this because I'm just locked into listening to you and I can go back and take notes later. So I'm just attentive to the chat. There's questions coming in, and I believe Amy's question is up next. Amy, I don't know if you wanted to ask your question, or if you'd like, I can read it for you.
I can ask it. I work in early intervention. And so we have children with all of the children I work with have disabilities of varying severity. And my biggest challenge is helping parents to see the capacity in their child. We often, as we know, learning takes a certain degree of discomfort, and that discomfort can look different for different kids. But I often hear from parents, well, we just want him to be happy. We just want him to be happy. But then we often see a decrease in learning and their resilience to challenge, except for, of course, we have some kids where it's built in kind of. But how do you help to shift the dial a little bit with parents to see their child for who they are, but also to see their potential too?
Oh, that's actually another big question. It sounds small, but there's a couple things. Talking about diagnosis and how that's really situated in the medical model, and that a diagnosis doesn't have to be a limit, but like placed on someone, but it can be an entry into understanding their experience, and an entry word rather than a limitation, which can be useful. And a useful way to frame it. I think sometimes also parents are really afraid. A lot of what they encounter when they receive a diagnosis through a very medicalized model is frightening. And for instance, if they get an autism diagnosis, there's a lot of really ableist materials up there. And some organizations like Autism Speaks, which until recently was working to cure autism, which you can't cure, like you can't cure a neurology. But that whole framing and what you're looking at, it can be so helping parents, I guess, turn their heads a little bit and maybe help to lead them to some resources that might be about presuming competence, or that might be ways of framing it. Like, for instance, the Autism Women and Non-Binary Network has a whole thing for parents called Welcome to the Autistic Community for parents. And so those leading them to those kinds of things is a useful thing. And also sometimes people really conflate what they've experienced in terms of ableism and the difficulty in navigating systems. They can locate that frustration in their child instead of in the system. So supporting them gently to consider that the problem might not be their kid. It might be the systems they're up against or the attitudes they're up against. So helping them to understand a little bit about ableism and how they might be experiencing it, and separating that out from what those things out from being located in their child instead of located in society, those might be helpful beginnings. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
So
You're welcome.
there's quite a few questions, Leah, in the chat here. Sarah, did you want to say it out loud, or did you want me to read it?
If you can hear me, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Sarah, it's good to hear your voice.
Hi. I was just wondering, and I guess this is part of my background and my own biases. How do you encourage students to become a writer if the focus is always so strongly on grammar and spelling and those conventions? Because of things such as disability. I mean, that was my experience myself, was I never saw myself as a writer. And thanks to Amber's course, I'm starting to develop those skills a little bit more. But I think the potential lies in so many students, but the focus even from parents and society and stuff is so highly focused on those pieces that then their self-thoughts tell them that they're not a writer. And you were able to have the situation where you developed your skills because your parents helped you write and stuff when those were a challenge for you. But how do you inspire others that have those hurdles or those challenges?
Right. And I think it goes for reading too. So
Yes.
there are supports for reading that don't require you to interpret text with your eyeballs. You can interpret text with your ears and it's still reading, right? If you're listening to audiobooks, I mean, that's still reading. Why have we got to filter it through our eyes to consider a reading? So really, writing could be with your mouth too. Like you could be saying, and there's programming and things now that do that. I will say, I have a doctorate and I am the worst speller I know. Okay. So but there are programs, there are supports that, my word is underlined in red. I'm like, habits doesn't have 2 B's. It should, because rabbits has 2 B's, but it doesn't. Right. So those kinds of things. So really like welcoming in. And then if you look at the opportunities for writing that are so especially if you're looking at early learners, there's so many ways to create opportunities for writing that are play, that are like, let's make a restaurant, you write the menus, you do this, or having a station in your classroom where there's bookmaking materials, or where you can read the classroom with pointers, or that's one of the things you could read during shared reading times. You could just read the classroom, go around and point at words and with a partner. And, so it's the same with writing, and writing together, or so there, and so shifting, and making it fun, helping with a shopping list, I like it. Maybe I'll write it, you illustrate it. Like putting marks on paper is lovely, and it doesn't have to be letters, right? And then there are all sorts of like things like developing the ability to cross the midline and OT things, and doing wall work, like where you hold the paper with one hand and you write with the other. So your hands are getting used to doing two different things at once. Sorry, look at my hands doing all these things at once. But there are all sorts of strategies and things you can do to actually build the strength. And often we're expecting children have that fine motor strength before they're ready. And especially if you might also have a disability that involves like, fine or gross motor things, children build from the gross motor to the fine motor, right? So if they need to be climbing, moving, doing, playing before we expect them to do this. We get it backwards a lot. We expect tiny little people to sit still in a desk and do this. There are other ways. I don't know if that answers it, but that's my answer.
Yeah, no, thank you. It totally does. And it also, I hear my master's project resounding in the words that you're saying, lots of it. So I really appreciate that response and hearing those pieces. So thank you very much.
Oh, you're very welcome.
There's another question. Harini, did you want to read or say your question, or did you want us to say it?
I think you could read it out for me. Thank you.
Okay, Harini,
I have a full house here.
I was going to say. So, Harini writes, since you had a story that brought up children talking about the parallels between race and racism and disability, I have a wonder about disability and intersectionality, and how that's shown up in your work. And curious about any thoughts on how arts-based or slash story-based work can support this thinking slash feeling space.
Well, sort of two parts to this. So one is how the intersectionality of race, racism, and disability show up in my work. That's really important, and it's key to my work. There's a couple things. One is that disability is not a siloed experience, and that disability occurs at the intersections of all these other identities. And then if you look at the access to diagnosis, for instance, there can be a lot less access when you consider poverty or access because of multiple identities and oppressions like poverty and racism, and how those can build upon one another. So it's absolutely relevant. Also, as a white, cis, Canadian, education privileged, housing secure, food secure, straight person, I have a lot of privilege. Even be able to go into a doctoral program, or to have the ability to write and do a book. So I was really determined that this book would bring in voices and perspectives and stories from people who didn't look like me and didn't have the access that I necessarily do. And that I could, I don't know if leverage is the right word, but I'm pretty political. And that if I was going to do this whole thing, that I was going to be leveraging my privilege to bring other voices along with me and to shine a light on other perspectives that don't necessarily get seen the same way. So this book, I am comfortable to say, is very intersectional and deliberately so in terms of the perspectives and voices and stories it includes. And people have been incredibly generous in sharing stories, their stories, and allowing me to put them alongside my own stories. So that's why I said that I'm like a curator of stories, and privileged to do so, and endlessly grateful of people's generosity. Yeah. So then the second part, so yeah, it shows up in my work. Thoughts about how arts-based, story-based work can support this. Well, maybe I answered all of it. Okay.
I think you did actually, and I think you did it in like perfect time. I'm so impressed. That's such a teacher who can just measure everything so instinctively. I think I always am like that's the mark of an educator, and we saw it in real time. Thank you so much to everyone for joining this event tonight that has been so rich. I feel as though the past hour has flown by. And Leah, my friend, dear colleague that I learned from so much. Thank you so much for this creative and critical discussion. We are so grateful that you shared space with us tonight and your knowledge. And this book is fabulous. And thank you for sharing it with the world. Please, everyone who's still here, remember to check out Leah's work on her website, and you can access a link to her book in the chat. If you go to her website, you can find how to get that book there. And do please consider reading this book beyond the excerpt that she so generously shared with us. It really is that excellent. And thank you for being here, and we're so excited for the next LLINK event. Have a wonderful evening, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. It was a treat to be here.